Well, welcome everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging the country that I'm currently on. Today I'm located in Darawal Nation, and I acknowledge with deep respect the traditional custodians of this land, the Wadi Wadi people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and to the Aboriginal community that continue to care for country. I stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history, and a continued effort to fight for Aboriginal justice and rights, paving the way for a strong future. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah O'Shea. I'm the Director of the National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education, the NCSE-HE for short. The National Centre is housed at Curtin University, is funded by the Commonwealth Government with a dedicated mission to improve the higher education outcomes, access, participation, retention, success, and completion rates for marginalised and disadvantaged people. We do this through a variety of strategies, including research, practice, and policy. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Nicole Crawford. Nicole was awarded a year-long Equity Fellowship in the latter half of 2019. And her fellowship was looking at students' mental well-being with a particular focus on mature age students in regional and remote Australia. As you would be aware, this year has been particularly difficult for our fellows who are experiencing varying levels of lockdown. And so we're completely delighted that they've all managed to complete or get to the end of their fellowships and are here this week to present on their research. We've taken a slightly different approach to this presentation and asked each of our fellows to prepare a short TED-style talk that focuses on a specific element of their research. And this will be followed by a live Q&A session, which today will be facilitated by both Professor Maria Raciti and also by Professor Sally Kift, both of whom are leading experts in the field. So without further ado, I'd like to now introduce Nicole's terrific 10-minute video. And I hope that you will enjoy this as much as we have. It provides just a very brief overview of her research.
Hello everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the Palawa people, the traditional custodians of Litruwita, Tasmania, and pay my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of the lands, the rivers, the mountains, the seas, wherever you're listening from today. In this lightning talk, I'm going to give you a little taste of my NESHE Equity Fellowship research, in which I looked at how we can proactively support university students' mental wellbeing. In particular, my focus was on mature age students in regional and remote Australia. The pressure and stress experienced by university students and its effect on their mental wellbeing is signalled by the striking finding that 47.7% of the survey respondents in my research project considered withdrawing or deferring from their studies, with the top two reasons being stress and feeling overwhelmed with their university study load. In Australia and internationally, university students' mental wellbeing is increasingly on the radar. There's a shift from viewing mental health and wellbeing as an individual student's so-called problem or as the sole responsibility of university counselling units to viewing it as everyone's business, which means it's everyone's responsibility in all parts of the university and at all levels. So teaching and support staff, staff in the library, staff in high-level management positions. So yes, all levels and institution-wide. For this short talk though, I'm going to focus on lecturers, tutors and support staff. What can we do to support students' mental wellbeing? What can we do to help them manage the normal stresses of uni life and to be productive and fulfilled? I've been wondering about these questions for many years and thinking about what I can do differently in my classes as a lecturer and a tutor. And I've tried out various ideas. My fellowship research, though, has enabled me to hear from a couple of thousand students, mature age students in and from regional and remote Australia, about what they think we can do better. And a major finding has been the importance of teaching and learning. Basically, I found that students' everyday interactions with their course, that is with their course content, with their assessment tasks, with their lecturers and tutors, and with their peers are really important. It's these small daily interactions that take place on campus or online that impact on students' mental wellbeing. Students want the nuts and bolts of teaching and learning to be done well. They're not asking for extra bells and whistles or extra mental health and wellbeing events. Let's look at these daily interactions through the experiences of two students that I interviewed. I'll refer to them by the pseudonyms Tracey and Olivia. They had a few things in common. They were both enrolled as online or distant students in an undergrad course. They both lived hundreds of kilometres away from the major city. They were both mature age students. Both had thought long and hard about embarking upon uni studies. It was the right time for them. It was now their time to study. They were both determined and dedicated. They both juggled other commitments with uni, and they carved out time for their studies early in the morning or late at night to fit in around their work and or children. Now that's about where their similarities ended. Now for some of their differences. First to Tracey. Tracey studied online through a university that is based in a major city, far, far away from where she lives and works. Pretty much from the beginning of her first semester, she was lost and alone. The campus was too far away for her to attend the orientation. She didn't know how to navigate her uni website or the learning management system, which for a fully online student is paramount. In many ways, she didn't know what she didn't know. For example, she was unaware of the availability of learning skills advisors who could have helped so much with the fundamentals of academic skills and literacies. She had endless difficulties in getting assistance with her studies and with getting answers to her questions. Because she was an online student, she relied on email and discussion boards for answers to her questions. She would wait days and days to get responses to urgent posts that she'd put on discussion boards. They were often about assessment tasks with impending due dates. She didn't know any of her peers. She didn't know any staff at the university. She felt invisible and ignored, and she felt she was an annoyance and that she didn't really belong. Exams were stressful, as Tracey explained to me. Like I'd be sitting there in online exams and the internet would cut out on me. Like I remember doing the law, I think it was, in my second year, one of the units, and it just dropped out every time I went to do my law exam. I felt so bad and I didn't pass that on the first attempt. And I think that was due to it was so stressful with the internet not working properly. I just couldn't concentrate. Yes, that sounds stressful. Fortunately, Tracey did have support from her colleagues in the company where she worked full-time. Several of her colleagues had studied online previously or were studying at the same time as Tracey at different universities. And it was thanks to this group of people that she gradually got a sense of what services should be available to her. They also generously helped her with the course content and assignments. While Tracey had this support from her workmates, and while she was determined and organised and hardworking, to say study for Tracey was a struggle is an understatement. It was disheartening and disempowering as she encountered endless barriers. Listening to Tracey made my heart sink. Study is hard enough at the best of times. It shouldn't be this way. Now to Olivia's story. Olivia juggled her uni studies with life on a farm with young children and commitments in her rural community. Finances and the internet were an issue. She chewed through her internet quota in no time, plus it was hit and miss. So she'd drive to nearby towns for a study space and the internet. But this regular driving added to petrol costs. She and her family made sacrifices, especially around finances and time not spent with her children, in order for her to study. Olivia was well prepared. She studied in a university preparation program, so by the time she commenced her degree, she knew how her institution operated, its expectations of her, and she'd developed the necessary academic literacies to find information, to write academic essays and reports, as well as how to communicate with her lecturers, with her tutors, and with her peers. She also knew how to seek assistance at university. Although she was enrolled as an online student, she had access to 2 physical spaces. One was a tiny public library in a small town that she'd frequent when her youngest child was in playgroup. The other was located in a town further away. It's what's known as a regional university centre. That's a study hub where she could use computers with the latest software and access free and fast Wi-Fi. And she had the support of staff there, and she met other students. Olivia raved about having this physical space where she could get face-to-face support. She noted, "I felt academically and emotionally supported and seen. I just felt seen. I generally have the same 4 or 5 or 6 tutors for the different units over the last couple of years. And so I really feel known. They emotionally support me if I'm going through a tough time." Olivia felt known by staff located at the university, even though it was hundreds of kilometres away. She'd actually met some of them face-to-face in her local regional university centre. I'm not saying Olivia's studies were easy. She certainly had her challenges, and she had to sacrifice a lot, and she had to rely on family and friends to help out with her children when she was on prac for weeks and living away from home. However, she had a variety of supports in place. Like Tracey, Olivia was determined, driven, and well organised. Unlike Tracey, she got timely answers from staff to her questions, she had connections with staff and peers, she had academic and emotional support. She felt known and valued. She was visible and she felt she belonged. For Olivia, uni was empowering and transformative as she became enthralled with learning. Listening to Olivia's story was uplifting. This is how it can and should be. So back to that earlier question, what can we, lecturers, tutors, support staff, actually do to support students' mental wellbeing? Well, from Tracey and Olivia's stories, the answer is lots. What worked for Olivia? Staff knew her, she felt connected with peers, she was prepared. Her assessment tasks were tailored to her interests and her location, which made them meaningful and relevant. She got timely answers to pressing questions. She could access free Wi-Fi and computers in a local library and in a regional university centre. And she was aware of the supports provided by her university. Lots of relatively small human empathetic actions can really make a big difference. And the good news is that the negative impacts experienced by Tracey are all fixable. It doesn't have to be this way. We can see that from Olivia's experience. With such proactive approaches, students like Tracey would be known and their needs catered to. They'd be visible and on the radar, which every student deserves. I'll leave it there and invite you to find out more about what teaching and support staff can do. Proactive approaches and ideas are outlined in webinars and a piece on the NISHI website, and also what high-level support is required to ensure the take-up of these ideas institution-wide can be found in recommendations and guidelines in the project report, which will be published on the NISHI website. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure you'll agree that was a terrific overview of Nicole's research that she's done in this field. As I said at the beginning, we've deliberately structured this just to give you a little taste of what's in the report, and I hope you enjoyed that. I know that I certainly enjoyed the illustrations, and I felt they really summed up so much of the mature age experience. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass over now to Nicole to talk more about her research. and also to Professor Maria Raciti from University of the Sunshine Coast, and of course Professor Sally Kift, and let them facilitate the Q&A stage. And as I said earlier, please feel free to put questions in Q&A so that they can respond live as well. Over to you guys.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And thank you again to Nicole for a wonderful insight into her fabulous research. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the Turrbal and the Yagara people and the beautiful country on which I am today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and recognise these lands always have been places of teaching, learning and research. So we've got about 40 minutes now for question and answer. As Sarah said, there are some questions have already been sent in, and please feel free to put your questions into the question and answer box as we go through. But perhaps I might just start, Nicole, if that's okay, and thank you so much again. If you could tell us a little bit about what brought you to this particular topic.
Absolutely. So it actually started quite a while ago, I guess, over the years as I've been teaching, but in particular, when I started working at UTAS in our enabling education program, so that's the university preparation program, I started there nearly a decade ago, and I just became increasingly interested and really concerned as well about students' mental health and well-being, because I could see that it was impacting on their learning and also on their lives. And I was interested in students who had mental health conditions, say anxiety or depression, but also students who didn't have, say, a diagnosed mental health condition, but you could see that they were stressed out and just finding it difficult to manage the normal stresses of uni life, with juggling work and juggling kids. So at that point, I really tried to embed some mental health literacy in the writing units that I taught. And with my colleagues, we really tried to be proactive and have sort of wraparound support throughout the semester, and so that we could put strategies in place early on before things got more stressful during the semester. So there was that kind of on the ground interest, and alongside that I started looking to the mainland, what we call in Tassie the mainland, to see what was going on elsewhere. And there were, there's a great project enhancing uni student wellbeing out of University of Melbourne. There's charters and reports and networks overseas. So the Okanagan Charter in Canada, and lots of great work going on in the UK. So over that period of time, I was just sort of interested in what was going on from more of a holistic institution-wide approach. So yeah, I sort of was putting those two interests alongside. So that really covers the student mental wellbeing aspect of the topic. And then there's why am I interested in mature age students in regional and remote Australia? Well, I'm interested in equity and in inclusion, and certainly regional and remote students are an equity group, and there's a lot of attention paid to this equity group nationally, because when we look at say completion rates or participation rates, the students in regional remote Australia, those kind of rates they perform, say, more poorly compared to their metropolitan counterparts. So there's a lot of attention paid on that particular equity group, but the attention is often paid to school leavers, which is completely fair enough, but there's also this very important and significant aspect of that cohort, which are mature age students. And I think that we can learn a lot about them, and that they can make a significant contribution with their families, their friends, and in their regional communities. So I guess really this topic, it's been an interest for a long time. And it's really the intersection of these three areas that I'm interested in. I've been able to sort of combine them in this one fellowship research project.
Thanks, Nicole. And we saw how important the university preparation programs in the enabling programs also were for Olivia's experience. But given the relational aspect of all of this work, could we just pause for a moment, and may I ask you, please, what the fellowship has offered you both personally and professionally as well?
Sure, yeah. So Well, it's been a unique opportunity for someone who has been, a teaching intensive academic for quite a long time. And so I've been sort of doing research along the side to suddenly have 12 months to focus entirely on one research project on a topic I'm super, super interested in. That was pretty incredible opportunity. So personally, look, I think that sort of opportunity since I was in PhD land, which was a very long time ago. So it really, in some ways, it took me back to being a student. And I was often thinking at different phases about students and, in relation to my experience of just receiving a bit of feedback and thinking, oh, wow, that's exactly what students need. So I really, I'd say just having that intense time researching, you realise what an ongoing learning experience research is, as is teaching. But I just got to learn more and more about each aspect of the research process. And, I certainly, there were challenges. I was certainly in a pickle at times, certainly early on when I was, it's so hard to define mental well-being, mental health, mental ill health. How am I defining my terms? What am I measuring? Am I using validated measures? All these questions were going around and around and around. And they're having all these questions at each stage of the research process is so important. It's, it's what it's all about, really. So that was all very interesting. And then that, takes me back to thinking at times when I just get this little bit of feedback from, say, a critical friend saying, you're making progress. And I'd be like, oh, wow, fantastic. Which then just makes you realise which is something that came up in the fellowship research, just the small little human actions, like replying to an email, just makes such a difference for students, and it made such a difference for me as well. So look, it's opened up a lot of opportunities. I've only recently finished it. So Sarah mentioned that I started it last year in July, and I just submitted the report at the end of June. And already it's just opened up a lot of opportunities as far as, my advisory group nudged me in about March to get some of the preliminary findings out, because we were realising how relevant they are to our current COVID-19 context. So that then led to a piece for the NESHE website. It led to some webinars, and it's just continued on with doing more and more webinars in Australia, and recently to a group in the UK. So there've been fantastic outcomes and opportunities already due to the fellowship and due to COVID. And I guess, it's just really opened what I do from the local ground much more to national and international, and from what happens in the classroom to what can we do more broadly institution-wide.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Nicole. And I'd just like to say hello to everybody, and I'm coming to you from Gubby Cubby country. Nicole, we've had some really great questions come through on the Q&A. So I'd like to ask you, kick off with one of those. The one that's come up at the top is, how can a student recover from a negative experience at university? What did your research provide some insights about?
Wow, that's a really good question. How can they recover? Look, it makes me actually think of my time in enabling education, where we find that a lot of students have had incredibly negative prior educational experiences. And so what you do in the classroom, and not just in the classroom, but from the very beginning, when a student walks through the doors at the university and goes into the student centre and meets someone at the counter or in the library, it's all those human experiences, I think, are so important to helping students have a different experience. You're not going to recover from a prior experience if the next one is equally as negative. So it comes down to lots of things, but what can we do? I guess it comes down to a lot of the sort of psychological needs that we have around connections and relationships, autonomy, opportunities for growth. And as someone who teaches, they're the sorts of things we might think about in our teaching context, but also it's not just limited to that teaching and learning context. It's, what happens in all parts of the university.
So Nicole, there's a couple of questions here from Christina, who has a regional study hub focus, asking both, is there justification to have support services such as counselling and academic support at remote study campuses, study hubs? And is there a shift, do you think, for students to going to the remote study hubs to help make those transitions, and particularly since COVID? So the question about counselling and academic support at study hubs, and are you seeing a shift to students going to those places?
Okay, so all of my data was collected pre-COVID. I'll just mention that. And certainly there were a lot of really positive comments in the student survey, in the open-ended questions, and also in the interviews from students who had access to a physical space, so such as what's now called the regional university centres or regional study hubs, which the student Olivia in the video had access to. And I think so that student's experience, she spoke about emotional and academic support. And I think in the regional university centres in New South Wales, and that's called country university centres, I think they do some academic literacy support, perhaps. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's a great idea to be able to extend student support services to the regional university centres. Just in general, I think for online students, having an opportunity for some face-to-face connection really seems important. It's so the results are really mixed, and when we drill down to see who is, who's doing well here and who's not doing well, it tended to be the students who were fully online and who, say, were studying part-time and had kids at home. They were the ones with the compounding impacts. So what can we do for students who are fully online? Well, if we can help somehow facilitate connections, and that might be online, that's one thing, but the face-to-face did come out strongly as so beneficial. The students who did have that experience, so they might have been fully online, but they could once a week or twice a week go to a physical space where they just had someone to talk to, there was staff there were peers. Now there's, so I do think that regional unis are a great idea. They're not, Australia is huge, so it's not like they're going to be, we can have them in all remote areas, maybe in the outer regional, but when you get to remote and very remote, but then there might be some other alternatives. So certainly it's one of my recommendations in the report is to think about expanding access to physical spaces. So it might be that there's a local library, or it might be a school that has facilities. So like a big bonus of the physical space is having access to free and fast Wi-Fi and computers, and then of course, that to people, having the emotional and academic support.
Wonderful.
So I think during COVID, students couldn't go to the physical spaces if they were in lockdown. But yeah, in general, I just think from the findings that it would be most advantageous if students could have some access to some physical space for both the just those practical challenges. I think you forget when you live in a city, the practical challenges of hit and miss internet. And maybe we've been experiencing it through COVID, where you might be relying on internet at home and it's not working that well, so we're having the experience. But the practical challenges and then the benefits of emotional academic support, they seem to be happening a fair bit in physical spaces like regional university centres. But there might be some other options as well to add, to complement the centres where it's just not feasible to have them.
Thanks for that, Nicole. We've got another question as well, which is really interesting, a focus on those students who relocated. So the question is, did you speak to any students who relocated to study? If so, what impacted their experiences?
Yeah, fantastic question. It's really interesting. The majority, and I think it was around 81 or 82% of the students surveyed did not relocate. and so they either studied online or at a regional campus, you know, maybe an hour or two away from them, or some people who didn't relocate actually even drove several hours to be face to face. But certainly there were students who did relocate, and I'm just thinking of a student that I interviewed, because we had a little team of us did the interviews. We did 51 interviews, and I can remember very clearly the interview I did with a student who relocated for her studies, and she had actually she's an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander student who had relocated to study when she was a school leaver, and she made a comment that she just said something like, I just threw it in, it was just so hard, she missed home so much. 10 years later, she was still keen to study, and she'd thought long and hard about it, and there were lots of things that had gone on in that 10-year period, and she knew exactly the kinds of supports that she needed once she had for relocating. So she was an example of someone who she really knew what she needed, and she also knew that she needed to get back home every semester, you know, every holidays she would go home. So for her, the supports were definitely academic support and emotional support. She spent a lot of time in her university's Centre for Indigenous Studies. That's not the actual name of it, but that's that kind of centre. And she had great peers, great staff there. She also, her living situation, she'd thought about that. She also had employment, and she had arranged it, or it was such that she had support from her employer to study. She had great support from her family. She knew what she wanted. She knew she needed her degree for ABC, and she knew she wanted to go back home to work and to be in her community. So it was an example of just, so many supports working very well. I can think of another interview that one of my colleagues did with someone who relocated, and it was very difficult. She felt that for her there was the age barrier. It was very difficult to meet people, and financially it was very difficult.
So Nicole, we've got another question. So I've just seen it's again from Christina, but I think it's a good question and goes beyond the regional study hub centres. Asking, did Tracey and Olivia attend orientation day, either online or in person? Because we know how important that is.
Mm-hmm. So I'll just say it was really interesting. It just so happened I interviewed these two students on the same day, one after the other. It was, and I just couldn't believe it was like opposite ends of the spectrum. And it was on a Sunday afternoon, and that was because Tracey worked full time and Olivia was doing her prac. So she was back on the farm with her family for that weekend, and then she needed to pack up and go to do her prac. And I know that Tracey did not attend orientation, so her orientation was face-to-face, and she lived like 700 kilometres or so away from the city where her university is located, and there wasn't an online orientation. So but contrast that with the other student, Olivia. Olivia actually lived over the other side of the country from where her university was, and she did not go to the other side of the country to the orientation. And I can't remember entirely. I don't know if she did an online orientation, but she certainly did the equivalent of a preparation program. So she was prepared as far as she knew how uni operates. She knew how to, navigate the systems and what to do. And she went to the regional university centre. So yeah, it was chalk and cheese as far as preparation goes for the two of them.
Thanks for that, Nicole. And just when you were mentioning before about the interviews, it just made me sort of think it'd be great to sort of have like a student mental wellbeing plan in terms of these are some things that can protect and elevate your mental wellbeing, some of the things you talked about there. And just there's a question on the chat, but I'll probably do a little bit of a twist on it too. I'm really interested. So your project focused on student mental wellbeing, and obviously the challenges of COVID and changes are sector-wide and are affecting staff as well. So could you comment on the relationship with staff mental wellbeing?
Yeah, absolutely. Sally asked me at the beginning what brought me to the topic, and said, you know, that had this long-term interest in student mental wellbeing. Alongside that, I've been really interested in staff mental wellbeing too. And actually, it must be more than 5 years now, a group of us who have been in who work in enabling education are part of the NEA, the National Association of Enabling Educators of Australia, special interest group on mental health. And so for those 5 years, we just meet for a chat every few months for an hour on Zoom or something, and talk about, we'll just share what we're doing, sort of a bit of debriefing, and I had this situation, someone might have an idea. And it started out, for the first year, we just really talked about student mental wellbeing. Then we realised very quickly that, we were interested in our own situations, and we actually wrote a paper together, a group of us from about 4 different enabling programs at 4 different universities, and we realised that we have, as staff, we carry an emotional load. There's an emotional labour in what we do for teaching staff and for professional staff. So I think the two are absolutely connected. If you are feeling, you're getting burnt out and you're stressed as someone who teaches or works in the library or works as an academic literacy advisor, you're just not going to have the energy to be as understanding, as empathetic when a student asks you a question. And sure, there must be then a ripple effect on how they feel, because we know how they can feel great when you do respond to an email. That's something that came out in the research, responding to their discussion post or an email. They were just, over the moon. So certainly the two are linked, and I think that we can't think about one without the other. And when we're thinking about this, institution-wide approaches and a culture in our universities, I'm thinking about students and I'm thinking about staff. And so I think for staff, we do carry an emotional load. We need to acknowledge that, and think about what we can do. And just in our little group, and also my colleagues at UTAS, I think we had a community of like-minded people, and just, going off for a walk together. I call them ice cream walks. We go down to the Maritime College and get an ice cream just for, a quick walk together. And as you're doing that, you're debriefing, you're talking about what happened in class, or and getting thoughts on that, or just someone's listening to you. So I do think it's something that we need to be thinking about in parallel with student mental wellbeing. I could go on a lot more about that, but I won't.
So thank you for that, Nicole. And I think what you've emphasised there is how important visibility is, and you raised that in your talk as well, visibility for both students and staff in this space. So we've got a number of questions from Claire, and I'll pick one of them, but I should also convey, and this is a quote, "You are fab, Nicole. Thanks for your great research," end quote. So thanks, Nicole, for being so fab, with which I completely agree. But the question that Claire asks is, how can course coordinators and tutors be supported to do this? And in your talk, you said Olivia has connections with students and staff. So how can course coordinators and tutors be supported to help students be supported and make these connections for studying online?
So that then brings us to that higher level, doesn't it? So I really don't want to be saying, oh, teaching staff, support staff, you have to do this, 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 and this. At higher levels, unions have a responsibility as well to resource and support staff in order to do that. So, for example, I'm just thinking of Kathy Stone's work on online learning. Kathy Stone talks a lot about a really important point for online learning of having a teacher presence. So we can help in the online environment to facilitate connections between staff and students, but you need to have a staff presence, and you need to pay for that. So you need to resource that. So I think sometimes, you know, casual tutors will be spending 10 hours to be responding to questions, and that's helping to facilitate the questions, facilitate the connections, but they need, you know, they might only be being paid for 3 hours. So certainly that is a big issue. What else can happen at the higher level is, you know, part of that supporting and resourcing staff is, say, support. So a lot of this is to do with inclusive practice. Well, so then providing PD on what that is. I think there's we can do at higher levels, unit coordinators might get some PD on how to do these things. And so that's, got to come from higher up as well. So I think I've answered the question about what can happen at higher levels. Was there another part to that, or?
No, I suppose it's generally about. I think a good colleague back in the day, Lynn Hunt, used to say we've got to get the context right for staff to get the context right for students. We've got to get the context right for staff so that they can. They can do all this, and I think you have answered Claire's question. I mean, an example that she gave was our course coordinators and tutors responsible for helping develop place-based student networks for rural mature age students. And if there is that support across the institution and it's institution-wide, then perhaps those sorts of, and I'm not going to suggest they're easy fixes, but they're certainly something, you know, a positive step that we can take.
Yeah. So, look, it's a really tricky one, because you're sort of thinking, how do we make it happen across the whole institution? Because already there are great things happening in Australia in pockets, in different universities, and, you know, in pockets within universities. To make it happen, and maybe to also get people on side who might not think it's important. That's where the tone at the top is really important, and that's what Ben Vaness talked about. He had a Churchill Fellowship, I think it's maybe 5 years ago, and so you've got to have VCs on this case. They've got to see that student mental wellbeing is important. So there's that aspect, and then, you know, staff also need to realise why it's important. You know, and University of British Columbia have done some great work on this. They sort of have these champions in their different faculties and try to build capacity, and it's all research based. Everything that they're, you know, all their suggestions are all research based. So yeah, where was I going with that? Somewhere that I forgot.
No, I think that's fine. I think question asked and answered, and I'm sure Claire, who already thinks you're fab, will be very impressed.
Wonderful. Actually, Nicole, probably now is a great time if you could sum up the 2 to 3 key learnings from your fellowship.
2 to 3 key learnings. Oh my goodness. There's about 15 to 20 or so. So look, probably one that it's been said before. Kathy Stone said it in her work. Other people have said it, but it's come up strongly in this as well. And it's actually one of my number one recommendation for universities, and it's number one in my guidelines for how we can be proactive. And that is, we need to know who our students are. And, you know, if we don't, what I think has happened and what I've seen in the research is we have some subgroups who are front of mind when we develop curriculum, whatever we do, whether it's marketing or whatever, they are front of mind. And then what happens is we sort of unconsciously privilege those groups of students, and then the students who are not front of mind, the students who are out of sight, out of mind, they then are sort of invisible, and then their experiences are not equitable. So that's certainly one. Another learning is just the importance of just the daily interactions with learning, with the curriculum, with staff, with peers. We just have to do our core business really well, and a lot of people do. But that really came out. I guess, it's a major learning, and the small human actions by all of us. That's something that continue to really get us, my colleagues and I, in our who were doing the interviews, we just kept, when we have our meetings to check in and analyse the data and stuff, we're like, wow, didn't realise what an impact such a small action has. Like the answering an email, responding to a discussion post, it makes such a difference, and students really appreciate it. So it's sort of doing our core business really well. They are a couple, I think, yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nicole. And Nicole, so what's next for you in terms of the fellowship and your research in general?
Okay, so the fellowship, well, the report will be released later in the year, I think, on the NESHE website. And I've been doing, a fair bit of dissemination in online presentations the last few months, and I'll continue to do that. But there's so much interesting data to explore further. So I'll be, and to write about, so certainly journal articles to write. You saw the just a couple of the beautiful illustrations by my colleague Morag Porteous. I really want to put something together with the illustrations and some of the sort of the composite narratives from the interviews for some staff PD, because I think that might, for some resources, that might be a really good way of helping staff to get a sense of, you know, the challenges that their students have and who they are. Yeah, so they're just a few thoughts.
Nicole, may I just follow up on that, please, with a question that's in the chat from Jess, and it's in a similar vein. And Jess asks, what plans do you or the centre have about sharing the important findings of this work with the students who participated in the study? And she congratulates you on your huge response rate, which I think you said was around about 2,000. That obviously shows how important this work is. So how are you going to share it back with students, do you think?
Yeah, so at this stage in my sort of I guess the brief for the fellowship, I've got recommendations for unis and then guidelines for staff. And another aspect of that is I want to have a section to add to this next year is really to feed back to the students with you know what I've heard from them, to feed that back to them in the form of, say, a web page or something where they can, you know, get a sense of the experiences of students, mature age students in regional and remote Australia, and the different sorts of strategies that they have, etc. So there's that aspect, and really I want to extend the research with the students. So I've got ethics to do that, and that's, you know, with the students that I interviewed, and also with that extra section I mentioned, that will involve getting feedback, having students involved in that as well. So there's a lot to extend with this research, and just, yeah, the students have been incredible. The passion, like, it's so many of them. So like 760 indicated they wanted to be interviewed after doing the survey, and then from, you know, obviously couldn't do that many, but they've continued to keep in touch with me, not the whole 760, but they would, yeah, just send me emails about what's going on, just, oh, you might like to know this for your research. So they're just incredibly interested and passionate and want to make a difference and want to be heard, want someone, I think they really enjoyed being listened to in the interviews.
Yeah. So with these sort of future steps, what do you think might be different in this sort of COVID world for mature age students in regional Australia?
Look, I hope that because we've all sort of had an experience of what it's like to be mature age student in regional and remote Australia, their normal is having to juggle work and study and kids and dodgy internet. Suddenly, lots of people are having this experience, whether they're in a city or not. So I think that hopefully we will have more empathy and compassion because we've been in their shoes. I think already, because of COVID, some things that might have been inconceivable, like shifting the student support services online, so having counselling online, having learning skills advice online, which in some unis might have happened, but in a lot didn't. that has happened. So that is magnificent for mature age students in regional and remote Australia. Also some things I think around, say, timetabling, you know, where students have to drive an hour for a 50-minute shoot for one day. Maybe now they can do that by Zoom instead of, you know, having 3 hours go out of their day for a 1 hour class. So things like that, hopefully they'll just be more front of mind. And the conditions are in place now. We've made a lot of these changes already. So hopefully we can keep them up and keep going with it.
That's great to hear, Nicole. Now, Nicole, your illustrations were wonderful, and Maura put a comment in the chat talking about how much it was a privilege to work with you and your team. So who else was on your team? Who helped you out through the project?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I'm talking about this research, but I didn't do it by myself. I had so many people alongside me throughout the project. Big, huge acknowledgement to everyone. Everyone's acknowledged in my report, but yeah, great big, huge acknowledgement to Sheridan Emery, who was been working away with me throughout the year. I had critical friends, Judy Skeen and Jess Woodruff. I had we were a team of research assistants, a team of interviewers. So Sheridan, Alan and Gemma and me, Morag with the illustrations, Penny Allen did the stats work for me. So yeah, just loads and loads of people, plus members of my advisory group. And then of course, universities were fantastic in being involved. You know, universities get asked heaps to send surveys to their students, so they've, you know, that it was great to have a lot of them involved. Otherwise I couldn't have administered the surveys. And then, you know, students were incredible. The response from students was fabulous. Yeah.
And if I might just say, Nicole, Morag would have also seen in the chat that a number of people have commented on how powerful the illustrations are. So it adds to that whole lived experience and visualization. The narratives are very powerful. So thank you and Morag for that. We might hand back to Sarah O'Shea now.
Thank you, Sally. Well, thank you so much for such a really interesting and insightful presentation of your research. I'm really conscious of time because you won't believe it, but we're coming to the end of the first of the Fellows Forum. But just to remind everyone that we do have another one tomorrow. So tomorrow we have Pathways to Allied Health, Insights from Indigenous Health Professionals. And that'll be presented by Andrea Simpson from La Trobe, and she'll be joined by Professor James Smith, and also by her, one of the project team members, Kim Alley. So just before we finish up, I just want to again remind everyone and thank them for being involved. And if you're not a member of the National Centre group, if you'd like to receive more information about what we do, then please sign up for our regular newsletter, go on our website, have a look at our information there. And if anyone would like to register for the webinar tomorrow, there is still space, and Nina has put that into the chat box, the link to that. So thank you again for everyone, and congratulations to Nicole. As she mentioned, her report will be coming out in the next month or two. We're just finalizing that and really excited about this research. So bye everyone, and thank you.